Hello and welcome to this Blender introduction. In this video we will go over the fundamentals of Blender 3D modeling and we will make this little plane here. It is quite simple, but well, gotta start somewhere, so let's get to it. When you execute Blender for the first time, you will start in this default view with a cube. And out of this cube we will make our plane. We will only work in layout and modeling view and don't concern ourselves with all the rest here. That is for later. Let's start by actually making a save file, and remember to press Ctrl S to save your progress many times while you work to prevent losing any of your work. For that we will go to File, Save As, and then I made already a file, plane.blend here. That will be our file that we work in. Now that we have our save file, Ctrl S or Command S on a Mac will save your progress. Now let's rename our cube into a plane so that we know what we are working with. For that we will rename the object here in the hierarchy, add ID data and then rename and call that plane. And in Blender, objects have meshes, so one mesh will belong to an object, but an object could have multiple meshes. So the plane object has a cube mesh, and this we will also rename into plane. Let's next go over basic scene navigation, and we will do that in layout view and in object mode. Object mode in layout is where you would arrange all of your objects into a finished scene. But of course, for now, we only have the cube. We navigate this view mainly by pressing the middle mouse button or two fingers down on a trackpad, and that allows us to rotate like this around. Then you can use two finger zoom on a trackpad or the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. And I can press Shift plus the middle mouse button or Shift and two fingers on the trackpad to move around like this in the view. Alternatively to this, you can also press the hand icon here and then move your mouse, and it will also move the view. Above the hand icon, you can find the view presets, which allows us to align our view to certain axes, which is quite useful if you, for example, want to align the position of some of your objects or vertices with the grid on a specific axis. To get out of the axis aligned view, you just have to press middle mouse button or two fingers on the trackpad and then rotate back like this. The other icons that you can see in the scene, this is a camera and a light, we will ignore for now because we're not interested in actually rendering with Blender. We just want to make a 3D model. Now that we know how to move the view around, let's learn how to move geometry around. For that you can click on the cube to select it and then press G for grab to move it. So the move shortcut in Blender is G for grab. And then we can restrict this movement by pressing, for example, X to align it with the X-axis, Y for the Y-axis, and Z for the Z-axis. Keep in mind, in Blender, the Z-axis faces up and down, and the Y-axis is the back and forward axis. Escape will cancel this move. So that is G plus X, Y, or Z to restrict the movement, or just Z in general to move around the view plane. Then we have S for scaling, and this will allow us to scale our objects, and here as well, by pressing X, Y, or Z, we can restrict the scaling operation to a certain axis, and escape will cancel the operation. Lastly, we have R for rotating, and also rotation. Like the other operations, I can restrict to the certain axis by pressing X, Y, or Z. These options can also be accessed on the left here in the selection menu. Next, let's have a look at how to edit our geometry. And for that, we will need to go into Modeling View, and it will change us automatically into Edit mode. Only in Edit mode we can actually edit our geometry. And editing geometry means to change the vertices, edges, or faces of our 3D object, which we can select here whether I want to edit the vertices, the edges, or the faces. Let's start in vertex mode, and I'll select the vertex here, and now I can press, for example, G for grab to move that vertex around, and I can also align that movement, of course, again with the axis by pressing X, Y, or Z. Let's see how that looks in edge mode. Edge mode will select one of these edges, right? And then I can of course also move that. Or face mode, I can select an entire face and I can move that, which of course is the equivalent of moving all of the vertices which are attached to this face. In any of the modes vertices, edge, or face, I can always press Shift to select another face, or another vertice, or another edge, or I can press Alt or Command on a Mac to select the face that I had plus everything that connects it to the other face that I select, pressing Alt or Command. Or we can do the good old drag and select, and I'll select all of the faces, vertices, or edges that are inside the selection. Keep in mind though that this does not select whatever is on the backside of the geometry. If I also want to select that, I have to go into X-ray mode. That's the toggle over here on the top right. That will make our geometry transparent. And now if I select and drag, you can see it also selects geometry which is on the opposite side. So by now, click and dragging the entire cube, I will select all of the faces instead of just the ones which are visible to me. Good, with that being said, now we can select, move, and modify the geometry. Let's have a look at how we add more complexity to it. And we will only use one tool in this video to do that, and that is called Extrude. For that, we will be in Face Select mode, select the front of the cube here, and then press E. And now I extrude that face. That means I will add the geometry necessary to connect this face with the cube there where it was before, and I automatically go into grab mode or move mode to move the new geometry where I want it to be. With the extrude tool, we can also press S to scale it down or up, the new generated face, or R to rotate it, which is usually not as useful. So what I usually want to do is I want to grab it, move it a bit forward, and now let's use this to make the body of our plane by scaling this forward face down a bit. It's a bit fiddly sometimes. Let's rotate over here so we can see it better. So S for scaling, I'll scale it down a bit. And then I extrude a bit forward and scale this down again, and now I have the front face of my plane. Now let's do the back face, the back part. Just extrude a bit like this. Now the end I will scale down and then grab on the Z-axis, move it up a bit. See better that this aligns. I can align the view like so. Extrude again, scale down, grab on the Z-axis, move this up, and then extrude back a bit. And there we go. Now we have the basic shape of our plane. One thing to keep in mind when extruding is if you ever press E and then decide you don't want to extrude and escape this, the face is actually still extruded. You don't actually cancel the extrude, you only cancel the grab. So if I now grab this, you can see that it is still extruded, right? So the extrude still happened, which means that we have some duplicate vertices around the edges here now, which is not a total deal breaker, but it's not nice. So make sure that this doesn't happen by pressing Control or Command Z to undo the extrude face action if you don't want to do it in the end. And now you can see after pressing Control Z, Command Z, it is undone and the face is attached to the geometry like it should be. Next, let's add some wings to our plane. For that, I will select where I want to add the wing and then Shift and select the opposite side on the other side of the plane so we extrude in both directions. And now I'll hit E to extrude, but I won't move because that won't allow me to move in a smart way here. Even if I go on the x-axis, right, I can only move it both left or right, and that doesn't work very well. So instead, I will press S and scale on the x-axis, and this allows me to scale from the middle in both directions and actually put like a nice symmetry on the plane. Now the plane's wings, of course, should be less chunky than this and a bit narrower. So let's put some effort into positioning the wings vertices right. First, I will simply move this, rather scale, so it's symmetrical, back into the middle, and then I scale on the z-axis down, so I get some narrow wings, like that. And now I will extrude again, but not move, instead scale, pressing X on the X-axis, so I can scale the next set of extruded vertices out. And again, I will scale on the Z-axis down a bit, so it gets a bit more narrow. And I will also scale on the Y-axis, S plus Y, a bit to make them a bit narrower on the y-axis too. And now grab on the y-axis, G plus Y, to move this back a bit. In order to get a better overview of how the wings are positioned, I can also align the view on the z-axis. Good. Now let's repeat that to finish up the wings. Extrude, scale on the x-axis, push it out a bit, scale on the y-axis, make it a bit more narrow, grab on the y-axis, move it back a bit, extrude, scale on the x-axis, move it out, then again scale on the y-axis, down a bit, and grab on the y-axis, move it back a bit. There we go. Nice, beautiful, plain wings. Now, since I attached the wings a little bit too far in the front of the plane, and I don't like that, I can go into X-ray mode to be able to select front and back vertices that I don't see, then drag all of my vertices in the middle and press grab and Y and move this back a bit. So the whole midsection of the plane goes back a bit so it just fits better. And all that remains now is the back part of the plane here. Can go out of X-ray mode, and this will work pretty much the same as the front. But I'll want to move my view a bit to the back to see it better, and for that I press Shift and then middle mouse button or two fingers on the trackpad, and I can drag my view over here. So now I can focus on the back part, and now it's the same as with the wings. I will shift and select both sides, extrude, scale on the x-axis and move this out a bit, scale on the y-axis, a little bit narrower, move on the y-axis a bit back, extrude, scale on the x-axis, out a bit, scale on the y-axis, bit narrower, scale on the z-axis now too, like that, and then grab on the y-axis, move this back. And there we go. Now we made our first 3D model, a little bit chunky, but I think still very charming plane. Now, on a little side note, since we are working with a mirrored 3D model that is symmetrical on the x-axis, you might have discovered these buttons up here that work on axis symmetry. So if I press x-axis symmetry and I go ahead and select one of my parts on the left side of the plane and move that, you can see that it actually moves the corresponding part that is mirrored on the x-axis as well. The reason that we didn't do that for extruding is that the symmetry simply doesn't work for the extrude tool. So if I extrude part of my plane, even if I am in mirrored mode, it doesn't extrude symmetrical, unfortunately, on the corresponding symmetry axis. So that doesn't work, which means we will have to extrude using the scale on the x-axis to extrude symmetrical instead of using these tools here.